Mainbrace Mayhem has the distinction of being the first vertically progressing level in the Donkey Kong Country series, something we'll see a lot more over the course of this game and later on in Donkey Kong Country 3. And like those future vertical levels, Mainbrace Mayhem can seem overwhelming and disorienting at times, but there's a feeling of scale that wasn't present before that really makes DKC2 feel like a step up from its predecessor, tipping its hat to its arcade roots as the world of Donkey Kong Country itself seems to open up to new heights. It's all smoke and mirrors of course, but it's still cool. This is part 2 of Overthinking Donkey Kong Country 2. Aside from the previously mentioned verticality, the core focus of Mainbrace Mayhem are the ropes and climbing mechanics. In this way, Mainbrace Mayhem mirrors Ropey Rampage from the first game, although Mainbrace Mayhem seems to expect a little more from the player. As a quick side note, I want to mention that originally, Mainbrace Mayhem was going to be set during a storm. I think that could have been cool, as it would have made the connection between Mainbrace Mayhem and Ropey Rampage stronger. Apparently it still exists in the game's code too. At any rate, I do love the wind effects here, and the level does have its own unique visual style. I hate to keep comparing this game's levels to their DKC counterparts, and I promise it'll lessen over the course of the series, but like how Ropey Rampage took what was established in Jungle Hijinks and used it as a jumping off point for some more advanced mechanics and enemies, Mainbrace Mayhem does a lot to get the character up to speed with some less common elements they'll encounter throughout the rest of the game. Less common is about as best I can word it. The new enemies and mechanics seen here aren't rare, no terrible pun intended, but they aren't exactly what I'd call prevalent throughout the game. The level throws a bit at the player right away. We first meet Click Clack, the beetle enemy, as well as encounter our first real leap of faith. Click Clack was originally planned to be in the first game, but was held back for some reason. I'm glad they were, as they work much better in this one. After being stomped, they can be picked up and thrown like a barrel. Clump and Neek return here too, and we're soon introduced to another new enemy in Klinger. Klinger is a Kremling who climbs up the ropes only to drop down. He's a really cool looking enemy and a great addition to the Kremling crew, but he can be tricky, especially in later levels. If you ascend too quickly, you might find yourself going ass to mouth with this guy, and so he very quickly teaches the player to be cautious when on the ropes. His introduction is actually another great bit of game design. He's safely out of the way, to the side of a grid the player needs to ascend, with the only incentive to get close being a banana coin on the other side. Here, players can take their time, get a feel for his movement and timing before engaging, if they choose to. He dominates the second half of the level, so this is a great little low-risk encounter to ease the player in. After the checkpoint, there's a row of 8 Neeks the player can mow through. They could be here to teach players how to chain cartwheels, or that barrels can roll through multiple enemies, but they're probably just here because it's fun to do those things. There's a mysterious lone banana above a horizontal rope that if curious players jump for, will shoot them onto a platform where they'll get a green life balloon. Not long after that, we find our first cannonball. We've encountered bonus areas before, but not like this. The cannonball might just seem like a variation on the barrel or crate, but take it to the nearby cannon and it'll launch you into a new bonus stage. Speaking of bonus stages, the 3 in this level all serve this secondary purpose as crash courses in rope traversal. The first tests your speed in ascending the ropes and jumping from one set to another. The second shows you how to knock enemies off the ropes and forces you to put a bit more thought into your timing. The third tests your agility, having you move up, down, and in between the grid. I think one of the things that makes the DKC trilogy so great is, while it might signpost some things here and there, it never treats the player like an idiot. These bonus areas are a great example of how the game gets the player out of their comfort zone, improving the skills they'll need to beat the game, but does so in such a way that they're too busy having fun to realize they're learning. The only other thing I can really think to mention is, a frustrating but positive upshot of the vertical layout means you can't really ever fall to your death. You just lose progress in the level. It's kinda nice, and encourages players to get a bit silly with it, taking more risky jumps just to see what they can find. As for what Mainbrace Mayhem can teach us about the story and world of DKC2, there isn't really anything that wasn't already covered in the previous level. The rigging is clearly in a state of disrepair, and like the deck, the lines and sails are infested with not just rats, but now bugs. There are almost twice as many pests as there are crew up here, so it looks like they run the show. The rats are all moving downward too, so maybe they're fleeing the ship. I doubt it, but it's an idea worth keeping in the backs of our minds as we continue on with the series. The Kongs are up here either because as monkeys they find it easier than moving across the hazardous decks, or because they had no other option. The Kremling presence makes me think it's the latter, because as we'll see in the next 2 levels, the hull of the ship is more than compromised. Episode 2 is done and dusted. Short and sweet, like all good Overthinking DKC videos should be. This level has a real business as usual feel to it, despite introducing several new concepts. Compare its design and difficulty to its DKC analog ropey rampage, and you can see what I mean. The level is much less straightforward, noticeably more difficult, and throws more at the player. It expects players to be up to speed with the ins and outs of DKC, but still, it's not too difficult for new players to pick up. In short, it respects the player's intelligence. So far, the Kong's quest to save their pal DK has revealed that the Kremlings are still very much operating, but also that the events of the first game have left their mark. We'll learn the true extent of this as we move on through Gangplank Galleon and onto Crocodile Isle. Until then, take it easy.